Soon humanity may reach out to the galaxy and spread ourselves to every world in it. But in the billions and billions of years to come, on those billions and billions of worlds, humanity shall surely diverge down many roads and posthuman pathways. Records of the entity known as the Spirit of the Air are sparse, and best known from the account known as the House of Suns, given by Porcelain Gentian of the House of Flowers, recorded 6 million years from when humanity first left Earth. But accounts agree it had once been a human and born in humanity's original solar system, sometime in the 3rd or 4th millennia. Those were early days when the first interstellar ships were heading out, and many pursued various posthuman pathways and life extension through relativity or cloning, often shattering their consciousness into many bodies at once to explore the galaxy and ensure no cataclysm could get every copy. His name had been Abraham Valmik, or something similar, a man of immeasurable wealth and considerable longevity, who nonetheless wanted more out of the universe than it had so far given him. For Valmik, neither shattering, time dilation, nor biological transformation offered sufficient guarantees. He wished instead to make himself into a machine, so that his consciousness might be embodied in something as close to indestructible as physics allowed. Neuron by neuron, he allowed his brain to be supplanted by mechanical parts. Since the process was gradual, akin to continuous redevelopment of a city, rather than sudden demolition and replacement, the man felt no change in his consciousness between the replacement of one neuron and the next. But that was not to say that he did not become strange to those who had known him, as his mind was slowly transformed into a humming web of artificial neurons. When the process was done, the man discarded his old body as it was no longer useful to his needs. He could still puppet an organic nervous system when circumstances required it, but they were few and far between. He preferred to interact with the abstract realm of simulated experience, only rarely bothering to communicate with the people he had left behind in the outside world. They bored him now. Their habits of thought seemed painfully predictable, as if their minds were running on tramlines. He felt different, like a fish that had flopped onto dry land and found that it could still breathe, while everyone else was stuck in the ocean. He had nothing in common with them now. For centuries, Valmik's artificial mind existed in a fixed architecture, in a fixed location. There were copies of him scattered, but they were only to be activated in the event of damage to or the demise of the primary mind. Over time, he had added to his complexity, integrating more and more artificial neurons into his mind, until they exceeded the number of functional cells in his original brain by a factor of many hundreds. By then he was so far from human that his only useful companions were other ascended minds. For a while they kept pace with him, until he began to ease ahead. They were too cautious, too unwilling to cast aside the last residual traces of human brain architecture. They clung to ancient wiring, archaic hollowed arrangements of sensory and cognitive modules. The structure of the human mind was a thing that had evolved through accident and happenstance, layering each new addition over the old. It was like the house where I had been born, with corridors and staircases that led nowhere, neglected rooms and hallways that could not be enlarged because they were hemmed in by others, plumbing that was fiendishly, unnecessarily complex, because each new installation had had to be routed around a pre-existing tangle of rusty pipes and drains. The others did not have the courage to sweep this jumbled, top-heavy heritage aside. He did. He was braver, bolder, less afraid of losing himself. He vowed to remake himself from the bottom up, reorganizing his basic architecture from the very foundations of his mind. No part of his brain would be left unexamined. Knots would be straightened out, modules moved around or deleted entirely. Throughout this process, consciousness would endure. It would grow faint as the changes reached their most radical phases, but it would never be entirely extinguished. The planning would need to be meticulous. Like a surgeon groggy with his own anesthetic, he would not be sufficiently clear-minded to intervene halfway through if something went amiss. all contingencies must be allowed for. As it was, nothing went wrong. He just became something weirder, larger, faster than he had been before. He had become something unique. But Valmik was not finished. Although he was better than he had been, incalculably so, he was still bound to one location, locked in the processing core of a single machine. That machine, once its power source, outer layers, and armor were taken into account, was as large as a small asteroid. In this era, long before the trivial secrets of space-time, momentum, and inertia were unlocked, he had to keep himself cool by boiling comets away to steam. He had become godlike in the private realm of his own mental processes, but he was still vastly, humblingly dependent on other machines and other human beings. If that flow of comets was interrupted, he would boil in his own brilliance. It would only take a single, well-aimed weapon to destroy the machine in which he lived. This was not good enough. The change that he forced upon himself took him even further from humanity, but by now being human was a landmass on a very distant horizon, one that he would not mourn when it eventually slipped out of sight. Every one of the tens of thousands of billions of neurons that constituted his mind was allowed to become an independent machine, capable of taking care of its own survival. In those early days, he still needed fuel and raw materials. He had not yet learned the simple trick of tapping vacuum for those basic nourishments. But the machines were clever and agile enough to find their own resources. Remaining in contact with each other via light, he became a cloud consciousness, occupying a much larger volume than ever before. In fact, the cloud could swell as wide as he wished. If he wanted to englobe a planet, to wrap himself around it, that was no problem. The only price he paid was a slowing in his mental processes, as the light speed lag between his components grew from microseconds to entire fractions of a second. Since there was nothing else in the universe he was interested in talking to except himself, this was not a pressing concern. He could even smear himself across an entire solar system and beyond. Now the simplest thoughts consumed months of planetary time. The solar system roared inside him like an overwound clock. Vast in size and number though he had become, Valmik was easy to miss. Because he played no part in human affairs, humans eventually forgot about him. There were stories about a thread of ghostly transmissions webbing the Oort, but no one took them any more seriously than a million other myths. He was incapable of being hurt, or even inconvenienced, by any imaginable human agency, but the sun might be a problem. In the decelerated frame of his consciousness, the end of its main sequence lifetime lay only a few thousand subjective years away. This was intolerable. The cloud consciousness decided that it was time to become interstellar. Rather than gathering himself into a concentrated formation and launching himself towards another star, like a flotilla of ships, albeit in unthinkable numbers, he began to inflate himself, sending his neuronal elements in all directions. It took tens of thousands of years before any single element came within reach of another sun, for the individual parts of him moved much more slowly than the swift ships of the lines. As he grew even more distended, so his thought process slowed down by yet more orders of magnitude. Expanded into a cloud encompassing dozens of stars, his quickest thoughts ate decades of planetary time. But at last, he was free from dependence on any one solar system. You can read more of his account and that of other posthumans in the epic novel House of Suns by Alastair Reynolds, set in an era long after the galaxy has been fully colonized, and by my reckoning a novel only matched by Isaac Asimov's Foundation or Frank Herbert's Dune. All three have something in common. They try to look at how humanity changes in the far future. But while the Foundation and Dune are set tens of thousands of years from now, House of Suns is set millions. I have never seen a tale handle deep time so well, and yet even this is an eye blink, as 6 million years is just a tenth of the time since the dinosaurs died out, and 100th the time since animals first arose. We estimate the universe is almost 14 billion years old. That's thrice the age of our planet and 200 million human lifetimes, or 700 million generations. It's also around 10,000 times longer than humanity has been around, depending on where we draw that line. And yet, we are less than 1% of the way through the main era of star formation in this universe, so we may wish to ask ourselves where humanity will be in another million years, or a billion, or even a trillion, when star formation rates start dipping off. And that itself is just 1% of the period before the final stars die and natural life ebbs out on that last planet. And life may last long, long after that by technological means, as we've explored in our Civilizations at the End of Time series. We might call this post-stellar dark era a post-human era, and yet it is so far forward in time, a billion times longer than Homo sapiens have been around, that it seems no more appropriate than calling it a post-dinosaur era or any other apex predator or dominant species that was king of the jungle for a time, or the oceans or mushroom forests. Indeed, on Earth at least, no critter was king of anything for 90% of the planet's existence, because no critters existed big enough to qualify as an animal. Whether or not there's intelligent life elsewhere in this universe, something we've discussed many times before in other episodes, animal life has only existed for 4% of the time this universe has been around, here at least, and it's changed a lot in that time, and more importantly, it's spread out to follow many different pathways too. Given that the post-stellar era is 200,000 times further ahead in the future than the dawn of animals is in the past, that's a lot of time for things to change and diverge on new pathways. Indeed, even if humanity remained a more or less static concept for a full billion years, it might still seem like a relatively short epoch to later life forms, and no more noteworthy a rung on their ladder than a single-celled amoeba, or whatever rat-like critter was the first mammal. With one important exception: technology. Humans are the first with technology, and thus the first who can really be making radical changes to ourselves with intent and within short time frames. With that, something strange and wild can pop up in a mere generation, and amongst many and by their choice, and possibly to agitate those around them, or even clearly threaten them, as some newly spawned and aggressive hive mind might be. In contrast to someone seeking to upload their mind into virtual universes, divorcing themselves from this reality, or choosing to have their mind integrated into a tree genetically modified to have neural pathways in its trunk. These and many more even stranger paths may await future human footsteps, or post-human footsteps, but today we can only simply try to look down some of them, and only as far as the terrain or horizon or obscuring fog lets us glance. And yet these post-human pathways may not take a million years to arrive, as they might be expected to by evolution, but could begin arriving even this century, and some of those post-human paths are decidedly inhuman. It's worth mentioning early on that we are trying to look at not just some of the more likely options, but also some of the stranger and wilder options. As a result, some might be very repulsive sounding. Your mileage may vary on which and how much. That's perfectly fine in this case because it's a decent measure of how deep into the uncanny valley a given approach might be, and thus how likely it is to be discouraged by future societies. As a reminder, the uncanny valley is a concept that describes the unsettling feeling people experience when a humanoid robot or digital character appears almost, but not exactly, like a real human. As the robot's appearance becomes more human-like, people's affinity towards it increases until a point where the likeness is close, but not perfect. This near-human resemblance causes discomfort or eeriness, creating a valley in the graph of emotional response, suggesting that small imperfections make the entity seem strange or creepy, evoking a sense of unease. This might be an inbuilt caution mechanism in humans, as minor anomalies in the appearance or behavior of someone else that you're not used to can be an early warning there's a problem, illness, hostility, or so on. Obviously, that doesn't imply such a reaction is either polite or ethically right. Also note that in context, we're assuming it's not a characteristic that would tend to invoke reactions all by itself, like someone wearing vampire teeth or having contact lenses that give them cat or lizard eyes. This is more the zone of things like eye contact being off or wooden or plastic facial expressions. It also varies by person. Mannequins don't bother many folks, they creep others out. I loathe the wretched things personally, and the entire notion comes to mind exactly because my outline for the script includes quite a few examples and scenarios that make me shudder personally. Those may turn out to be rationally justified. The strange is often new and dangerous, and we seek to condition ourselves not to unfairly feel the new and strange because of that strangeness itself, but rather the danger it might entail. By and large, the reaction is instinctive, not rational. But rationality requires collecting data and trends, which we cannot have when something is brand new, so that instinct is not a bad one to have. Yet we should not let it control us or prevent us getting more data when possible for a more rational response. Anyway, it is something of a disclaimer for the episode, because some of these are going to get weird. We are not contemplating minor augmentation of mind or body or transhumanism here. We're talking post-human, meaning not human anymore. The strictly physical is perhaps the most obviously inhuman, and yet in some ways the most trivial. A person opting to have an extra set of arms or wheels in place of legs or an 8-legged spider chassis can certainly evoke some body horror, but we would mostly weigh that aside as physical rather than mental, with the obvious caveat that someone having done that to themselves may already have a fairly atypical psychology or alien mindset. Possibly literally too. One of the more obvious driving forces for human modification is adjusting to harsher climates. We do not know how folks responded to the first person to don a dead animal's skin for warmth, or a proverbial fig leaf for modesty. It might have been shock or horror, or it might have been envy or desire to emulate that choice, or some combination thereof. There was an amusing example of that in the first serial of Doctor Who, when they used the TARDIS the first time in the show to go back to the caveman days, and we encounter a tribe that's recently lost their leader who was the only one who knew how to make fire, something they hadn't had long either. Most want fire back, but one old lady, who was the wife of the former chieftain and mother to the new one, trying to figure fire out, thought her husband's death was divine judgment and wanted no more of it, feeling fire would kill them all. Sounds funny, and indeed the first couple of Doctor Who serials are pretty cheesy, even by the show's normal standards, but until maybe the last few generations, fire was both humanity's greatest invention and most devastating one, regularly killing us, and our ancestors treated it as both, blessing and curse, probably because they not only saw many folks die from it, but saw burn injuries a lot, which are very long and painful to recover from when not fatal, and a horrible way to die. Very dangerous tool, and in that respect, very like artificial intelligence, I suspect. Our Time Lords from Doctor Who are an interesting example of post-humans themselves, though obviously alien rather than human in spite of their appearance, borrowing the 8th Doctor's half-human throwaway line in his TV movie, which I quite enjoyed. And appearance is a good point here, because they change bodies once a lifetime. Obviously that was a plot point to replace the aging actor who first played the Doctor, but it is a believable approach. One pathway to nominal immortality is to keep a backup for your mind that can be put into a new body if something happens to you. We tend to talk about cloned bodies, but there's a handwave there to assume you could grow one fast and without a mind. Options for androids or biodroids might be more the norm, as might brainless bodies replaced with a hardware for uploading and downloading minds, akin to the sleeves in the Altered Carbon series. Such being the case, a lot of folks might want an identical copy to their own body, but many might not, wanting to try something new. Taller, shorter, more muscular, different hair or skin color, different gender, no gender, 2 sets of genitalia, 2 heads, 4 arms, 8 legs, eyes of a different color, or which can see colors outside the normal visual range. Now, we should not assume all such changes have no impact on the mind. Even something as trivial as altering your hair color impacts you a little, or something as natural as building your physique through exercise, which has big hormonal and confidence-boosting changes. Nonetheless, we can see something fundamentally human left over even in those more extreme changes, the extra arms or legs, and imagine how a person with those changes is still very human of mind and also sane. So it isn't hard to imagine why the Time Lords shift bodies between incarnations, especially as each ending in an often violent death or a natural lifetime of several centuries both might feel like good endings to a given chapter or book. Time for something new. The personality change even seems semi-justified, much as we could imagine someone wanting to start a whole new life, new job, new journey. Part of having a very long life in a high-tech civilization is likely to be wanting to avoid boredom. For many anyway. I could also see folks cheerfully having the same home and career and community for millennia, while others shuffled it more regularly, or shuffled other attributes and aspects of their life while keeping some stable. Same job, many bodies, or same body, many homes in different lands. But the Time Lords of Doctor Who looked very human, even though alien, and that's probably backwards of reality, as we would not expect aliens to look human very much, as we explored in our Convergent Evolution episode, while we would expect humans living off Earth to tend to start looking and acting more alien themselves, which returns us to the point of physical changes made to handle the harshness of the environment. One of the most common accessories put on characters to make them look less human is some sort of breathing mask. We see it in a lot of sci-fi and post-apocalyptic fiction, and some comic books too. Bane from Batman comes to mind, so does the Martian Mechanicum. It dehumanizes the face and distorts the voice, but as we all learned during COVID, it could be worn if necessary. Your mileage may vary on if it was or not. I personally abstain on having an opinion since the event didn't hit me as hard. I already worked at home when it began and rarely wore a mask more than maybe an hour a week, plus was already used to wearing gas masks from my time in the army, including several months as our nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare officer till Sebastian arrived at our unit and settled in, so I got particularly used to wearing them. COVID was a foundational event of the times ahead, and those masks and everyone's mixed dislike of them, dislike of being made to wear them, and worries over what would happen if they did not, are probably a good insight into what life in an early space colony might be like. A lot of the feedback we get from astronauts about how grimy and unpleasant the space station is to work, live, and try to sleep in is also likely to be handy. There's not a lot of debate, obviously, if a breather mask will keep you alive on an airless world, beyond it being insufficient without a helmet on, but that's exactly where the push to transhumanism can come from. You decide a high-tech pair of contact lenses can protect your eyes against vacuum, and some thin polymer coating on your skin can too, and is less uncomfortable than always having on a helmet. Indeed, you have it all over your body so that your spacesuit can be relatively light and kept at low partial pressure, and thus is more like work clothes than some bulky suit nobody but a firefighter wears to work. You don a breather mask when outside and always have one in a small air tank clipped to your side. Some folks start wondering if it would be easier just to have some hose plugged into their lungs directly or right above, with a tiny membrane airlock in their throat that could close off if the pressure dropped. We don't actually need much oxygen to breathe, so replacing someone's lung, which takes up around 5 or 6 liters of volume, with a pressurized oxygen canister containing maybe 5 kilograms of tank and apparatus for replacing lungs or scrubbing carbon dioxide, is likely to leave you with lungs holding at least a day's worth of oxygen, as we use less than a kilogram a day ourselves, even when considering fairly large and active people. You might have a discrete port in one nipple to let you refill off an external tank once a day, or you might be able to breathe in normally and it just stores oxygen for use when you can't breathe, so it might be seamless. This is not particularly post-human, incidentally, but an example of how an option might be made attractive by necessity. We examined that more in our Cyborg Civilizations episode during the summer, and how folks might use such options as necessary, but grow to like them as they got used to them and they improved. But even having a body, let alone a human body, is something that's not guaranteed in a post-human existence. You might decide to be an uploaded mind, or a brain in a jar living in virtual environments, but you might forego a classic body there or in the real world. Why limit yourself to one body? We mentioned hive minds earlier and we'll come back to those, but the reverse case of many bodies and minds forming a greater group mind is one normal mind piloting multiple bodies. Instead of jumping to a new body occasionally, you just run a few, or even several at a time, and have your mind or minds augmented to allow you to be able to handle several of them at once in the same way you can handle several fingers or limbs at once. So too we have the example of the Shatterlings from House of Suns, where a number of people living about a millennia from now decide to explore space by having themselves each cloned 1,000 times, and sending each clone out in their own ship, to explore in different directions before rendezvousing at an agreed upon time and place to exchange their accounts, and then do it again. The settled galaxy they continue to explore as time goes on is nothing like unified, as there is no fast light travel or signaling, and the time frame is enormous. So they only maintain their sanity and purpose by using a mix of stasis and relativity to slow down their experience during travels, and even then they archive their brains a lot, clearing their primary memory. That book has some other posthumans in it too. One is a Dyson swarm built to serve as a library whose inhabitants are all giants. They got around mortality and brain limitations by living in zero gravity and letting their bodies just keep growing bigger and bigger, so the oldest of them are giants filling whole spaceships. And in the context of deep time, the ability to keep living is not likely to be the hard part. I suspect we'll have conventional mortality beat by the end of this century or maybe the next. It also isn't very likely we'd have a hard time avoiding being murdered or starving to death, as a post-scarcity civilization, even one that's got to watch how quickly it chews through its resources, just isn't likely to have day-to-day survival be much of a concern for citizens, even decade to decade. After that, it becomes a lot more about finding a purpose you can grasp onto for centuries, but ultimately those centuries are just eye blinks. What could you do to keep your will to live in the face of geological or astronomical timelines? Being a librarian of all humanity's enormous history is a good cause, like those giants. Solving some great problem, perhaps, which they were also up to, but I think we are wrong to assume anyone would really care about the 999th septillionth digit of pi, or the 100th significant figure of the speed of light or gravity. This is why you might want to alter your mind to remove feelings of boredom, or ratchet them way down, and this might be a development sooner than centuries down the road. One of our likely focuses with early transhumanism is improved neural tissue, to improve signal propagation speed, thus effectively speeding up the thought process, prevent neurodegenerative diseases, allow simple, more natural connections to human-computer interfaces and implants, or allow connection of human minds, directly or wirelessly. When you can work on these, you can do things like dampen or heighten positive or negative emotions, curtail anxiety, boredom, depression, and heighten or dampen anything else you choose, possibly with the ability to dial it up or down at whim. But mastering the neural pathways lets us alter the layout and also the substrate, what they are made out of. By default, we think computers, and uploaded minds to computers is a popular one in sci-fi and serious speculation too. Indeed, it would tend to be a better approach to interstellar spaceships, uploading a human mind into a ship, as we see in the Barbaverse series by Dennis E. Taylor, which explores life as both a von Neumann space probe and as an uploaded copy of a mind a lot, including making copies of yourself to head off to other solar systems. You may or may not have an android, or even a normal flesh and blood body that still wandered around that ship and could walk onto planets or space stations you visited. Indeed, this approach gets around a lot of the problems with spaceships, particularly military ones where the ability to act fast and dodge fast might limit organic components and crew. But you might not want to abandon an organic brain like those giant librarians. or the Rael from Peter Hamilton's Commonwealth saga, who are an ancient species of physically massive, hyper-intelligent aliens that remain mostly biological even after millions of years. They are bigger than a bull elephant and have many eyes and tentacle limbs, and would be terrifying to be in a room with, but ironically are perhaps the closest things to friendly Guardians of the Galaxy in that setting, opting not to ascend to higher planes of existence like many other ancient races had. Needless to say, Transcendence is also a posthuman pathway, but we discussed it more last month in its own episode. Peter Hamilton's other novels, both in that series and the Night's Dawn trilogy among others, are full of fascinating posthuman options, as is Charles Stross's novels, particularly Singularity Sky and Accelerando, and Ian M. Banks' Cultural series, which focuses heavily on transcension options. Growing bigger is also a pathway used in Dune, spoilers coming, but in Book 4, God Emperor of Dune, which I think is the second best novel in the series, but will probably never get made into a film, we see Paul Muad'Dib's son, Leto Atreides, use his mastery of his internal biochemistry and precognition to let himself merge with a larval form of sandworms, the sand trout, to slowly, over the millennia, become a human sandworm hybrid, whose mind extends throughout his enormous and grotesque bulk. A pearl of his consciousness remains after his death in each new sandworm, including those transported to other planets. We could imagine, to become a huge spaceship with their brain, even an organic one with regular ore neurons, spread throughout a spaceship, potentially a huge one. And again, you might have a physical body connected to that. We could assume some gross tendril-like plug into the skull, but we could assume simple Wi-Fi transmitters too. We don't want to get into the habit of assuming you only ever use one substrate and it has to be human brain cells or silicon computer chips, or whatever you're making chips out of. You could choose to weave your consciousness into a mushroom forest in a deep dark bunker cave somewhere, your brain made out of fungi. Or you might weave it into a tree or several trees connected by roots if needed, or without a biological connection in favor of having all the trees in the forest as nodes, genetically engineered to grow a brain cell equivalent, and just have Wi-Fi plugs in trees like maple syrup taps. But you should be able to grow something like that with sufficient genetic engineering skill. Tree people isn't an uncommon one in fiction, and another good example of that is Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, which is also set millions of years in the future, and is probably the best known series from the Dying Earth genre with the exception of Jack Vance's original Dying Earth novels. We get some very post-human critters there too, from human aristocrats who seem freakishly tall and skinny to other ancient entities, maybe original human or alien, that have also pursued gigantism to extend their life, and indeed we get to interact with someone pursuing this strategy. Lots of weird and fascinating examples of altered humanity in that book, which is set in a time when the sun is slowly dying and cooling, and humanity has dwelled on Earth so long that the whole surface is endless layers of archaeology, and even the mountains have all long since been carved into statues of great and terrible kings. And these slowly being buried under the ice as time passes and glaciers spread ever further. We even encounter one such ruler, surviving by grafting his head onto another dwelling inside his own mile-high statue. But as the sun dies, humanity grows weaker and more techno-barbaric, on Earth anyway, and our protagonist for the series encounters a green man, something of a living tree, at one town he encounters, kept as a novelty, but actually a time traveler from a more distant era where the sun is ever dimmer and where they have modified themselves to have chlorophyll in their own skin to help provide fuel for themselves. It is not hard to imagine people going this path, deciding they don't want to eat other animals or even plants, just photons. And at this point, why not give up classic gardening in favor of becoming a garden yourself? Or passing the centuries as consciousness distributed throughout a garden path, using robots or controlled critters in your collective to keep yourself well ordered and pruned. This could be how to sleep away the centuries, and you may have an android or body on ice waiting to wake up when needed. This could go either way too, not greater minds but simpler ones, something we see in Peter Watt's novel Blindsight, where consciousness is considered an unfortunate and temporary fluke of evolution. Also something we see with the fate of humanity after even the Morlocks and Eloi in H.G. Wells' Time Machine, when the distant descendants of humanity are just crab-like creatures wandering the blood-red beaches of a dying Earth, chasing enormous butterflies in a world covered in lichen, before the world ceases turning and the sun grows large and red then dies, leaving all buried under the glaciers. Speaking of mile-high statues and glaciers though, in this context we could imagine people having themselves put in some huge computer or other mind alternative that was modeled to look like a statue of themselves or just their head. It might be rock or metal too. You can weave a neural network into very nearly any material if you wanted to, even a glacier if you wanted, or the bedrock of a world. We talk about purposes for posthumans, and monitoring a world while life progressed on it, be it some primitive species of aliens or even simple animals, might be a task better accomplished by being a living planet, or at least a mountain or a region of bedrock recreated to be a mind, a protective genus loci for that world, or for an artificial habitat more regular humans dwell on, your wards or even distant descendants. Perhaps you and other founders of a colony on another distant alien planet decided you wished to make sure that planet was terraformed, but knew you could not last the tens of thousands of years it would take, not as humans, and so each of you lay down on the alien soil and merged with a piece of it, you a forest, a neighbor another forest or a lake full of sentient algae, an island, a glacier, a mountain, a vast solar array keeping the right amount of sunlight on that planet, maybe even a loose hive mind, participating in slow councils with each other to guide the fate of that planet. Why not be a whole planet mind, or J-brain or M-brain, Jupiter brain or Matryoshka brain, a mind fueled by a whole sun? There are more suns in this galaxy than people now alive, by a factor of dozens. You may run a J-brain where thousands or even quintillions of others dwell inside vast virtual subverses and which you tend. Those inhabitants might be posthumans themselves, or merely human, or even folks' prior pets, cats and dogs running through endless warm meadows and forests of the substrate you built this upon, which might be a computer or a massive organic brain, or something built of a material designed to last a trillion years. For the posthuman, time is no barrier, and yet is the most eternal enemy too. If you dwell as some sentient asteroid with a fusion reactor, or micro black hole for energy, you might well be able to last quintillions of years, or even longer on that supply, all while your own mind was so immense and fast that every second a normal person experienced was 1,000,000 years to you. When you decide to migrate your intelligence from one asteroid to another larger one, just a few light seconds away, a process that takes a few human years to build the new architecture and move yourself for the transfer, you've experienced 100 million years of life in that time. Even back here on Earth, a fast uploaded mind in an apartment building sized computer running them and virtual worlds might see someone spend a weekend in a virtual world and emerge 1,000,000 years old. Imagine being unplugged after that only to remember modern Earth when you have watched thousands of civilizations rise and fall in the meantime in those accelerated realities. It would not seem like any human could endure that without going utterly mad, to be insane by any human definition, and yet such people may come to exist and experience those eons of lifetime even before our first conventional interstellar arc ship arrives at a new world. It would seem like no human mind could endure such tracts of time, and that no human purpose could be maintained over all those eons. It is impossible to imagine all the pathways humanity might take in the future, and what motives and purposes may drive people to become posthuman, or which will occupy them if we do. But perhaps it is enough to know that if we can grow beyond our pale blue dot and survive the next few centuries, then we will see a galaxy descendant from us in one fashion or another who will spread out to every star and come in as many forms as those stars are numbered, and remain until those last stars burn out, and possibly beyond even then, perhaps to survive even till the end of eternity. We considered a number of pathways future humanity might take, and one of those might be as warden of a region or even a whole world. In this month's Nebula exclusive, Caretaker AI and Genus Loci, we explore the concept of both AI wardens and even posthumans putting guardian roles over everything from a small facility or habitat to entire planets or interstellar communications or defenses. That's out now on Nebula, the largest creator-owned streaming service where we release a bonus episode every month, along with all our regular content a few days early and ad-free, other bonus content and Nebula originals from an ever-growing pool of creators. Using my code IsaacArthur, you can get 40% off and join for about $3 a month, about the price of the drink or snack you've been enjoying during the episode. We also now have lifetime membership and gift cards available to let you share Nebula with friends and family. When you sign up at my link, go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur, and use my code IsaacArthur, you not only get access to all the great stuff Nebula offers, like Caretaker AI and Genus Loci, you also be directly supporting the show. So today we looked into the distant future, and this weekend we're journeying into the very distant past to look at the dark stars that first formed our universe near the beginning of time. After that, we'll wrap up October with our Halloween episode, Ghost Armadas and Primordial Galactic Wars, to consider ancient interstellar battles and leftover weapons from those dawn times. Then we'll start November up with an examination of early terraforming techniques and challenges. If you'd like to get alerts when those and other episodes come out, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. You can also help support the show by becoming a member here on YouTube or Patreon, or check out other ways to help at isaacarthur.net. SFIA's episodes also come out early and ad-free on our streaming service Nebula, like this month's exclusive episode, Caretaker AI and Genus Loci, at go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great week.